Chapter 8. Theo preferred not to stay at school after classes and watch the girls play soccer. He himself did not play soccer, not that he had a choice. The asthma condition kept him away from strenuous activities, but even without the asthma, he doubted he would be playing soccer. He had tried it as a 6-year-old before the asthma and never got the hang of it. When he was 9, while playing baseball, he collapsed at third base after hitting a triple, and that ended his short career in team sports. He took up golf. Mr. Mount, though, loved soccer and even played in college and was offering extra credit to students who hung around for the game. Plus, there was an unwritten rule at Strattonburg Middle School that the girls cheered for the boys and vice versa. Any other time, Theo would have happily watched from the bleachers, taking casual notice of the game, but really sizing up the 22 girls on the field and those on the bench as well. But not today. He wanted to be elsewhere, on his bike, handing out missing flyers, doing something to aid in the search for April. It was a terrible day for a game of any kind. The Strattonburg kids were distracted. The players and their fans lacked energy. Even the opposing team from Elksburg, 40 miles away, seemed subdued. When another helicopter flew over 10 minutes into the game, every girl in the field paused for a second and looked up in apprehension. As expected, Mr. Mount gradually made his way over to a group of women. The worst kept secret in school was that Mr. Mount had his eye on Miss Highlander, a stunning 7th grade math teacher who just 2 years out of college. Every boy in the 7th and 8th grades had a desperate secret crush on Miss Highlander, and evidently Mr. Mount had the same interests as well. He was in his mid-30s, single, by far the coolest male teacher at the school, and the 16 boys in his homeroom were aggressively pushing him to pursue Miss Highlander. When Mr. Mount began to make his move, so did Theo. He assumed correctly that Mr. Mount's attention would soon be focused elsewhere. It was the perfect time for a quiet exit. Theo and 3 others drifted from the soccer field and were soon on their bikes racing away from the school. Their search party was much smaller, and this was by design. Yesterday's had too many kids with too many questions, had too many opinions, and too much activity that might be noticed by cops, such as Officer Bard. Plus, there had been fewer volunteers during the school day as Theo and Woody got things organized. The sense of urgency that Theo felt was not shared by many of his classmates. They were concerned, all right, but many of them thought that searches by kids on bikes were a waste of time. The police had SWAT teams, helicopters, dogs, and no shortage of manpower. If they couldn't find April, the search was hopeless. Theo, along with Woody, Aaron, and Chase, returned to the Delmont neighborhood and roamed the streets for a few minutes to make sure the police were elsewhere. With no cops in sight, they quickly began passing out missing flyers and tacking them to utility poles. They inspected a few empty buildings, looked behind some rundown apartments, picked their way through an overgrown drainage ditch, checked under 2 bridges, and were making real progress when Woody's older brother called his cell phone. Woody froze, listened intently, then reported to the gang. They found something down by the river. What? Not sure, but my brother's monitoring his police scanner. Said the things had gone crazy with chatter. All cops are headed down there. Without hesitation, Theo said, "Let's go." They sped away out of Delmont, past Stratton College, down into downtown, and as they approached the east end of Main Street, they saw police cars and dozens of officers milling about. The street was blocked. The area under the bridge was sealed off. The air was heavy with tension and noise. 2 helicopters were hovering over the river. The downtown merchants and their customers stood on the sidewalks, gawking into the distance, waiting for something to happen. Traffic was being diverted away from the bridge and the river. As the boys watched, another police car crept up beside them. The driver rolled down his window, then snarled, "What are you boys doing here?" It was Officer Bard again. "We're just riding our bikes," Theo said. "It's not against the law." "Don't get smart with me, Boone. If I see you boys anywhere near the river, I swear I'll take you in." Theo thought of several quick retorts, all of which would lead to more trouble. So he gritted his teeth and politely said, "Yes, sir." Bard smiled smugly, then drove away toward the bridge. "Follow me," Woody said as they raced off. Woody lived in a section of town called East Bluff, near the river on a gentle rise that eventually gave way to the lowlands around the water. It was a notorious place, full of narrow streets, dark alleys, creeks, and dead-end roads. The neighborhood was generally safe, but it produced more than its share of colorful stories of strange events. Woody's father was a noted stonemason who had lived his entire life in East Bluff. It was a large clannish family with lots of aunts, uncles, and cousins, all living close to each other. 10 minutes after an encounter with Officer Bard, the boys were zipping through East Bluff along a narrow dirt trail that zigzagged high above and beside the river. Woody was pedaling like a madman and making it difficult for the others to keep up. This was his turf. He'd been riding his bike through these trails since he was 6. They crossed a gravel road, plunged down a steep hill, shot up the other side, and got serious air before landing back on the trail. Theo, Aaron, and Chase were terrified but too excited to slow down. And, of course, they were determined to keep up with Woody, who was prone to talk trash at any moment. They finally slid to a stop at a small overlook, a grassy area where the river could be seen below through some trees. "Follow me," Woody said, and they left their bikes behind. Clutching a vine, they scampered down the side of a cliff to a rocky landing, and there below was Yancey River. Their view was unobstructed. A mile or two away to the north were the rows of small whitewashed houses where the river rats lived, and beyond them was the bridge, crawling with police cars. On the other side of the river, close to the bridge, an ambulance was just arriving on the scene. Policemen were in boats. Several were in full scuba gear. The situation looked tense, almost frantic, as sirens wailed. Policemen darted about, and the helicopters hovered low, watching everything. Something had been found. The boys sat on the cliff for a long time and said little. The search or rescue or removal or whatever it was called was proceeding slowly. Each of them had the same thought, that they were watching an actual crime scene in which the victim was their friend April Fenimore, and that she had been harmed in some terrible way and left the edge of the river. She was apparently dead, since there was no urgency in getting her out of the water and to the hospital. More police cars arrived, more chaos. Finally, Chase said, to no one in particular, "Do you think it's April?" To which Woody abruptly responded, "Who else would it be? It's not every day that a dead body floats into town." "You don't know who it is or what it is," Aaron said. He usually found some way to disagree with Woody, who had quick opinions about almost everything. Theo's cell phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it. Miss Boone on her office line. "It's my mom," he said nervously, and answered his phone. "Hi, Mom." On the other hand, his mother said, "Theo, where are you?" "Just left the soccer game," he said, wincing at his friend. It wasn't a complete fib, but it was also pretty far from the truth. "Well, it appears as though the police have found a body in the river on the other side near a bridge," she said. "One of the helicopters, red and yellow with Channel 5 painted boldly on the sides, was obviously sending a live feedback to the station, and the entire town was probably watching." "Has it been identified?" Theo asked. "No, not yet, but it can't be good news, Theo. This is awful." "When are you coming to the office?" "I'll be there in 20 minutes. "Okay, Theo, please be careful." The ambulance was moving away from the river, then onto the bridge, where a line of police cars formed an escort. The procession picked up speed over the river, with the helicopters trailing behind. "Let's go," Theo said, and the boys slowly climbed up the cliff and left on their bikes. Boone and Boone had a large law library on its first floor, near the front, close to where Elsa worked, keeping an eye on everything. The library was Theo's favorite room in the building. He loved its row of thick, important books, its large leather chairs, and its long mahogany conference table. It was used for all sorts of big meetings, dispositions, settlement talks, and, for Miss Boone, pre-trial preparation. She occasionally went to the trial in divorce cases. Mr. Boone did not. He was a real estate lawyer who seldom left his upstairs office. He did, though, need the library from time to time to close real estate deals. They were waiting for Theo in the library. A large flat-screen television was on with the local news, and his parents and Elsa were watching. His mother hugged him when he walked in. Then Elsa hugged him too. He took a seat near the television, his mother on one side, Elsa on the other, both patting his knees as if he had been rescued from near death. The news report was all about the discovery of a body and its transport to the city morgue, where authorities are now doing all sorts of important stuff. The reporter wasn't sure what was happening in the morgue, and she was unable to find a witness willing to talk, so she just prattled on the way they normally do. Theo wanted to tell everyone that he had a bird's eye view down the river, but such a statement would make things complicated. The reporter said the police were working with inspectors from the state crime lab and hoped to know more within a few hours. "That poor girl," Elsa said, not for the first time. "Why do you say that?" Theo asked. "I beg your pardon? You don't know it's the girl. You don't know if it's April. We don't know anything, right?" The adults glanced at each other. Both women continued patting Theo's knees. "Theo's right," Mr. Boone said, only to comfort his son. They flashed the picture of Jack Leeper for the 100th time and gave his background. When it became apparent there was nothing new at the moment, the story grew old. Mr. Boone drifted away. Miss Boone had a client waiting in the lobby. Elsa needed to answer the phone. Theo eventually made his way to his office at the rear of the building. Judge followed, and Theo spent a lot of time rubbing his dog's head and talking to him. It made both of them feel better. Theo put his feet on his desk and looked around his small office. He focused on the wall where his favorite sketch always made him smile. It was an elaborate pencil drawing of a young Theodore Boone, attorney, in court wearing a suit and tie, with gavel flying in his hand by his head, and the jurors roaring with laughter. Caption screamed, "Overruled," at the bottom right corner, and the artist's girl had scribbled her name, April Fenimore. The drawing had been a gift for Theo's birthday the year before. Was her career over before it started? Was April dead, a sweet 13-year-old kid brutally abducted and killed because there was no one to take care of her? Theo's hands were shaking and his mouth was dry. He closed and locked his door, then walked to the drawing and gently touched her name. His eyes were moist, and then he began crying. He dropped to the floor and cried for a long time. Judge settled next to him, watching him sadly. That's the end of chapter 8.